maybe can we just dive in? Yeah.
I think so.
It's almost like sometimes when we're writing or doing these kinds of things, it's like where do you start? And that becomes the block. So maybe like jumping into the middle, which yeah, just saying, yeah,
Well,
please.
I was just going to say, you had just said,
Hmm.
I just listened to the 10th episode of the telepathy tapes, and we're like, let's hit record. So that's
That's
where
where
we
we're at.
are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Snapshot. Um, yeah, so and I know that this is something we wanted to talk about for a while, and maybe I'll just say like if this goes out there, just to say, the telepathy tapes for anyone who's not familiar is about I mean, it starts off following nonverbal autistic kids who are, the parents and teachers and people around them are reporting that they're able to read their minds and they're able to communicate in other ways. And so and then the whole series expands from there. So it starts there, but it's really about this expanding consciousness, this shifting paradigm. And so in this episode I just listened to, they dedicate an episode to the kids that are the subject of this, where the kids are delivering messages and they're often doing it through that spelling where they're, you know, I don't know. I've never actually seen a speller or a board. I'm not sure what that is. I'm imagining it's like an iPad that has letters on it, almost like a Ouija board or something. And then someone will help them move their arm by just giving it support. Something about that will allow someone who has autism or who is disassociated from their body to have a little bit of a grounding to be able to move. But the messages that are coming out are so just unbelievable. It's this evolution of consciousness, and these kids who haven't had a voice suddenly have a voice, and they're saying these things like how they are here. They know their reason for being here, and they're here to help usher in this next wave of humanity, this higher vibrational space. Um, and they're so excited. There's this energy of like we finally are communicating. It's like we've made contact with this, with these people who now recognize that we are here, we are in these bodies, and not only that, they're connected interdimensionally to all of this field of knowing, and um, yeah, and even hearing them in their own words try to describe what telepathy is, I heard one of them say that it doesn't really do it justice. In some way, there's kind of not a stigma, but impressions or ideas of what that means, and for them, it's something more. It's more of a knowing. Like when we move beyond our words and are still connected and communicating, what does that look like? I'm going to stop now because I've been talking for a while, but it's just like I'm just kind of enamored that this is all coming up at this point in time where we really are shifting and so many people are struggling to figure out not just what's happening in the world, but what's happening in their own personal world, myself included, that here and we're having these experiences. Some of them feel very magical and metaphysical, and now we're getting this validation out in the world to say, yeah, these things are real. There are, science might have resistance to proving this or to allowing the proof to be out there, but at the same time, it's because science is living in the current paradigm, and it's a pretty big leap for us to step into this new reality. So, yeah. So that was my drive home today.
And I don't know if you noticed, but for me, when I'm listening to it, my heart expands. I'm very present with the information that they're bringing through.
Mhm.
And yeah, I would have to second that. When I listened to that particular episode, I mean, I lit up. I'm lit up now. Like it is validation for so many things that I have been feeling for decades now. It is of them saying, we're here to usher in the new paradigm, the new world, whatever. I'm paraphrasing at this point, but it is a very transformative experience, even to just listen to the tapes, in my opinion. I mean, it is it is definitely a shift in consciousness that happens, at least for me. And I think it is a paradigm shifting thing. I mean, we've talked about this before off when we weren't recording, but it's like I really feel like it's the hundredth monkey. And they were just on Kai was just on Joe Rogan, which whether you like him or not, like he is the biggest, I think, podcaster in America, if I'm not mistaken. Like he gets really high numbers. So that's exciting because more and more people are going to be aware of it. And it's just an exponential growth that's happening. It's very exciting.
It makes me feel like I'm feeling in my body that like part of me that has that, if I would have had support as a child that wasn't normal, um, and for all of us that, if we could have had more opportunity and more support, like because I feel like we are that first wave of, people that we have been ushering,
Hmm.
we're ahead of these children, but they need advocates. They need people, like they're doing in this podcast saying like, oh my gosh, there is this whole other paradigm that's happening and making it real and making it have substance. I think it's the grounding it in part that gives us that like, holy shit, like this is really happening. Like
Yeah.
they're pushing things to the threshold. So it's like if you don't believe, then maybe you'll believe it this way, or maybe you'll understand it this way, which I see as just like multi-faceted dimensional ways of how we are moving into where we're headed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I've told you both about my having a Kundalini experience in 2018 and not having a belief about it. It was just something that happened to me. So I didn't have a discipline, I didn't have a belief. It happened. And it was like 6 months. I mean, it's still going on in a way, but those first months were like being down Alice, in Wonderland, kind of down the rabbit hole. And and I often would ask about the intensity of it. Like, what was the purpose of that intensity? And I really have come to the conclusion that if it had been any less intense, or if it had just been one thing that happened, or something here and there, I would have found a way to disprove it for myself. I would have talked myself back into the old way of being. So it was almost like that intensity, like a wave, was kind of serving that purpose of like, yes, you can discredit this and you can discredit that and you can rationalize this and that. But with it all happening at once, it forced me into this place of recognizing there was something different happening that didn't fit into my understanding of the world. And when you say that hundredth monkey kind of effect, I feel like that's kind of what's happening now, because there are so many people and so many ideologies that would want to discredit that these nonverbal autistic kids can read someone's mind with that kind of accuracy. And yet this wave of information and people stepping up and sharing their stories, and even like you say, going on mainstream outlets to be able to share that story, is opening up people to the idea of what is possible, and also allowing them to recognize that in themselves. Because I have memories of being a child and having access to information, being able to see things in magical ways, being able to know things in magical ways. And I also have memories of very specific instances in time where someone told me that wasn't possible. Or they may have even told me that was wrong and I needed to shut that down, whatever that is. And I did.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I did. And I have one very specific memory from recently that came up the other day of when my son was probably 3 or 4 years old. I remember I was lying in bed with him one night and I made eye contact with him and I saw deeply into his eyes. And I remember I have the memory of him telling me something, and I wish I could tell you exactly what it was, but it was something about the expansiveness of the universe. And now as I sit with that memory, I can see it very clearly in my mind's eye, but I have this dissonance because I'm like, I don't think my son was that articulate verbally at that age.
Right.
I'm not sure he said that out loud. It
Yeah.
was clear communication. I remember it was him, but I'm not sure he actually vocalized that, which makes you wonder, yeah,
That gave me goosebumps, Tim. And I'm just imagining a world in the next, because of this, the telepathy tapes alone in the next,
Mhm.
I don't know, 10 years, how differently we may even raise children and differently, how differently we may respond and react and just be with and communicate with our animals, and I mean, I'm even looking at my animals because they have a particular, I don't know if it's five or six the episode, but where they talk about animals and telepathy. And I certainly noticed that in my cats and now my dog. And it's like, oh wow. you know, just how it would open up the world to a new way of being. And I think that's one of the ways they're ushering it in, and you know, without even having to do things the traditional way. Like it's just coming in. It's just beautiful.
It's bringing that, using our whole body, all of our senses, all of our abilities instead of just our brain.
Mhm.
It's like,
Absolutely.
I remember one time in a class I was in, and she had us look at what our hangups were in asking questions. And I remember words were never easy for me. And so, and I still struggle with, like, if I'm in a class and I have to really try to formulate, which is part of my sensitivity, but it's part of, I'm not experiencing things in words. I'm experiencing them in all of who I am. So kinesthetically, I'm really taking in information. And she had us look at what our beliefs were. And I had this like child part of me. I had a visual of a child part of me. And I just was like, if I would have went to Hogwarts, I would have never had this problem, because I could have just sent the question to my teacher and she would have sent it back, and I wouldn't have had to deal with this embarrassment and formulating of words. And so when I was listening to the telepathy tapes, that kept touching that part of me. Like, God, can you imagine if these children had a Hogwarts to go to,
Mm.
or to be with all of the other children that are magical, and just how beautiful. And hopefully that is where we're going.
Yeah, as we think about language now, I mean, it's almost if you think about telepathy, how you can send thought forms and feelings and like all of it all at once. It's way more than just like a word. So it's very, if you think about language now, it's very clunky. You know what I mean? As opposed to heart speak, I guess is the way to, and it's just, I, I imagine a world where we'll probably get back to that at some point.
I wonder, probably all three of us could say on in some way that we've experienced telepathy. Would I be right in assuming that? Yeah. I wonder how much things like this, like the telepathy tapes, are going to open up that conversation because I feel a little bit more empowered or a little more validated in being able to talk about those experiences. And it's interesting, I don't want to talk about the specifics in some sense because it involves other people and I don't want to share someone else's story. But in those moments of, it's almost, I would describe it as like pure communication. It isn't just words. I mean, there might be words to describe it, but the experience of it is, it's visual, it is kinesthetic, it's auditory, it's knowing, it's clear, sentient. It's that idea of like connection that honors our connectedness. Like, the communication is there, the knowing is already there. So it's just a matter of like, how are you sharing that, or how are you receiving that, or how are you open to it? Um, but yeah, I think, and as we build a language around what that experience is more, just like these kids are reporting because of the viral nature of the telepathy tapes, some of the subjects are reporting that they're actually finding access to more skills than they had before. I wonder if that will be true for us as well, for our community as well.
I
Um,
love that because they say something like the more people believe in what we're doing, the more access we have to different things. And yeah, like what if it turns us on too? What if it lights up those parts of us that haven't been lit in, thousands of years. And it's just this whole thing.
And perhaps too, it's that has been on all along. Like when we think about neurolinguistic programming, which describes how we experience the world, we delete, generalize, categorize, distort information as it's coming in that creates our experience. So there's a reality out there that's going on that is not fully represented in what we're perceiving and what we're seeing. And in that sense, there could be things happening all the time, and our brain is just discarding it with all of this other extraneous noise that doesn't create our experience. But as we start to give a language to these things and say, oh, this is important to us, then maybe more of that shows up. And I was even just thinking earlier in the conversation when you mentioned pets and animals, I wonder how many people have had the experience of being really down or sad or something, and their cat or their dog comes up and curls up next to them or even puts its head on their heart or something. And, we perceive that as empathy, and it is, but we don't take that step further to say, what actually is happening here? How do they know that this is going on in me? What are they sensing that's creating that point of connection where they want to come and comfort me? I mean, animals are they just do that naturally, and they do it so naturally that we take it for granted. We don't really stop to think, wow, this is really amazing what's happening here. Um, and I probably also have all had that experience of being at a party or something and someone walks in and the vibe changes or the energy changes, or it's like, oh, there's something going on with this person,
Mhm.
or feeling danger, or maybe feeling connection too. I can be positive about that. But like how we have those intuitive senses going on all the time too, and we often will not think about that fact that is happening, or we'll give it another reason, or just minimize it in general and move on. So, yeah.
I think about all of the years that I've sat across from people that would categorize themselves as intuitive or empathic or highly sensitive, and how they do have all of these skills. They've just been told that they are bad or that something is wrong with them. And what this, podcast is doing is giving, it's like writing permission slips right and left of like, oh, it is okay that I'm talking to my animals. Oh, it is okay that I'm communicating with my partner and not speaking. Oh, it is okay. And we have to keep writing those permission slips so that this, I think about like, I mean, as psychic as I am, I have to believe that my grandmothers or, there's somewhere in my lineage there was others that were highly intuitive, but they had to hide it so severely. And what permission it's giving to be like, let's all just let our weird out. Let's just see how weird stuff can get. And making that playful instead of demonizing it.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like one of the challenges, not to bring that in too much, but also just thinking about going back to that episode and hearing all of these kids talking, and in some cases they're like 12, 13, 14 years old, giving these really profoundly wise and connective and knowing messages about connecting to vibration and frequency and the interdimensional nature of reality and all of these things, and how they're here to be able to usher that in and to be participants in that. Hearing that message, I think, is challenging because it really, if somebody really hears it, and I'm going through this myself right now, you have to also ask the question, well, what's important? Are all of these things that I've been worried about and struggling with and trying to move through, are they really important? And if I determine that they're not, I know my subconscious critical voice is going to step in, because the things I might want to do and pursue and spend my time on don't necessarily equate to safety and security in the current system and paradigm. Even being here in this hypnotherapy journey and this energy journey and writing and creating and all of those things, there's certainly a perspective that what I'm doing is not being a responsible adult. And yet also that quote I always come back to, that Mary Oliver quote, what is it you plan to do with this one wild and precious life? Like if we have that perspective of there's more going on here, this is spirit having human experience, and how precious does that make my days and the opportunities I want to give myself, the things I want to learn and know, and the people I want to interact with. It kind of changes everything. And then it's a foot in both worlds. So then it's challenging. Well, I still have to pay my bills and keep a roof over my head. And how do I hold space for all of this? And I don't know.
We're all learning
Yeah.
Yeah.
together.
I think that's the challenge of living in this time right now of ushering in a completely different paradigm and consciousness raising and all of that happening, but at the same time, like the old world is still here, although it's disintegrating sort of almost before our eyes. Like you do have to sort of be a really have a really good balancing act going on and different practices that will help. I'm not saying I have all the answers. And I think that's part of the reason why we're so excited about creating community too, is because having that available for folks as we shift paradigms is so important.
Mhm. Yeah, one
Yeah.
thing that I don't presence too much for myself is that idea of like what we're trying to create when I think about the people that we'll meet. Even just sharing right before we hit record that I had gone to a networking event this morning, and every time I put myself out in the world as me, as who I am, is what I'm trying to do. Because a lot of times I'm out there and I'm wearing the mask, so to speak. But when I really allow myself to be vulnerable in that way, something comes of it. I'll meet someone who is on the path or has something to offer on my path or whatever that is. So yeah, just thinking about not just what we're trying to create, but what's organically evolving all around us too.
Yeah.
It is
There's
like,
so many opportunities
yeah.
that we don't even know. And I think that these children are such a great representation of like we are ushering in new energy and we need to be with other people that are ushering in new energy so that we can see that in each other, that we can be like, oh, well, I know this person that knows this person that could help you do this.
Mhm.
Because we can't go into the old systems or old paradigms and be like, can someone tell me, we really need community for that, to hold us in that.
Yeah. And I think the change happens faster the more we can do that, you know.
And also it comes down to desire as well. Like I don't want to do these things alone.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I think yeah, when we look at like what is asking that question of what's really important, like when we really think about these different perspectives or new ways of being and these things that these kids are ushering in, it really is about connection and being seen, I guess, recognizing that divinity and even in ourselves through the eyes of another or in another through our own sight. Yeah. Well, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Feels like a good stopping point. Thank you all.